Next order of business is the roll call of members. Please indicate your presence when the machine is open. If all the members voted, Tyler, roll.
Hey there, welcome back to another riveting episode of Sessions. Interesting day today. You're going to be hearing this right as we get ready to start the second half of session. We're filming, though, on the last day of the first half of session. And just to give you an idea of how wild that can be and how busy it is and everybody's trying to wrap everything up, we're starting without Earl because he couldn't get here on time for us to actually start and stay on schedule because we're going to shoot two episodes today. And so you just get me and our special guest for a little while, and then at some point Earl's going to come in, probably disheveled, so in a three-piece suit, and we'll jump right into the conversation. But today's guest is a return guest. If you were an OG listener of Sessions, you would have had we had a conversation with Kip that was not video, so now you get to see what he looks like, which I think is...
My apologies.
Yeah, I actually think this episode won't perform as well as the first one did. But Kip's joining us just to talk a little bit more about life as a government affairs professional, but also about what this first half of session looked like, what he's thinking is going to happen in the second half, what he's thinking about as we get into another part of the legislative session. So, Kip, thanks for coming back,
sure,
this time in living color.
Yeah, well, it's pretty black in here. But yeah.
It is dark in here. It is pretty dark in here. Earl will be back with us here in just a few minutes, and he'll take it to another level. But, Kip, we're coming into the second half of session. What's kind of your takeaways from this first half and kind of what was happening in the building?
Not a lot of surprises. It seemed like a typical long session with folks concentrating on the budget. You've got a new governor, so that changes the dynamic because all of his staff are getting sort of, the wind beneath their wings, as you will, or
Sure.
whatever, still trying to get acclimated, find the bathroom, figure out who's who. And so probably some communications issues between the governor's office and the third floor, what we like to call the third floor, which is the legislative branch.
For just on that for 1 second. So, from your perspective in the profession that you're in, when a new administration comes in, how do you go about starting to figure out how to work well with them? I mean, I guess it probably starts a little bit, prior to the election or prior at least to the inauguration, but kind of how do you all approach, both from a firm standpoint and your own profession, on how you're going to start to build a relationship there?
Well, luckily for my firm, one of my partners was on the transition team, so I got to know some of the folks that were going to be put in those positions and start to build relationships there. But it's just like anything else in life, it's building relationships with people and establishing a trust factor, establishing that you can call them with issues that your client might have, and getting to know who's trusting and who's not, and
Sure.
whose word can be counted on, who can't, and trying to always wire around people who aren't very truthful.
Yeah. So I interrupted you. What else from this first half has been notable to you?
Well, I mean, it's kind of in that vein. There's clearly a difference of opinion on what we need to do about property taxes from the second floor to the third floor. It'll be very interesting in the second half to see how that works out. And as you know, very, very, very granularly, it's a critically important subject, and it's something upon which your constituents worry about. It was one of the number one issues during the last campaign cycle. I thought the Democratic candidate for governor laid out a serious plan, and it I think is closer to what the Senate passed than what the governor wants, which is kind of interesting as well. But it's a very delicate balance, and most legislators have a grasp on that difficult balance, and most, I think, legislators want to make sure that local governments have enough funds to do what they're supposed to do, which is teach our students, which is make sure that police and fire are well funded so that we can protect our folks and fix the roads, right? So, the closer you are to municipal government, the more you appreciate that there isn't a lot of waste. I mean, there's waste everywhere, right? There's waste. There's waste in corporate America. There's waste in public school systems. There's waste in charter school systems. There's waste everywhere. But it's a pretty lean operation at the municipal level because you're so close to the voters, you can't really get away with wasting a lot of money. And so the idea that we need to cut property taxes at the expense of municipal government has real consequences. And so that fight's going to play out, right? And the other side of the fight, which you know as well, is that there are people that are pretty squeezed on property taxes, and they keep going up despite the fact that we had a constitutional amendment to cap them. It hasn't seemed to work because it's still a problem here 16 years later.
Yeah. You said not a lot of surprises. Anything that did surprise you in this session? Maybe the difference in opinion between the Senate passed
I wasn't surprised
you
at
weren't
that.
Surprised
no,
there,
because I didn't think that the legislative folks were going to just hop all on board the governor's plan, because it wasn't. I don't think it's terribly realistic unless you can find some sort of replacement. And of course, the governor during the campaign didn't want to have to reveal a replacement, because that ox is somebody's gore, or gore's somebody's ox. I'm sorry, I think it's gore's somebody's ox. Yeah, and when you're running, you don't want to gore too many oxes because you want them all to vote for you.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So any surprises then? So what did stand out to you as a surprise? We had the bill today, homelessness, the criminalization of homelessness.
It died.
It did not make it out of the House today.
I was a little surprised it didn't make it out of the House.
That was a surprise to me too.
I had a client ask me, "Was that a surprise to you?" And I said, "Well, I'm not supposed to admit this, but yes, it was a surprise to me. We're supposed to know everything before it happens, but no. When she passed on it, I was pretty surprised. But I thought the debate yesterday on some of the amendments had an effect, and so when the minority sometimes feels like they don't have much influence on the process, I think probably yesterday they did. There are a lot of folks, I think, who are concerned about. To back up just a little bit so people understand, it was basically the conversation was a fair conversation about what we ought to do with chronic homelessness and how it can lead to a lack of civilization, and people shouldn't be able to go to the bathroom on the streets or do drugs on the streets, and how do we try to curtail that?
Sure.
But criminalizing it, stick them in jail, I think is a pretty significant step, and I think there's statistics that show that actually makes things worse. It makes it even harder for them to get out of the hole that they're in, and so I think hopefully that prevailed, right? And that folks looked at it and said, yeah, we want to cure this, but we don't want to make it worse.
Another bill that didn't make it out of the House was on partisan school board elections. And I think we do have something coming probably from the Senate, but that was a surprise to me too. I kind of actually believe that would move, but it did not.
I actually think there's a lot of legislators that are hesitant about wanting to politicize the local school board. They aren't as boisterous about it, but they see some of the danger there, potential danger, I should say. Sure. I think there's states where they do it, but there's a lot. Then there was some conversation, I think, about people who are working for the federal government or get grants for the federal government being unable to be in a partisan election, and so it would not wipe out a whole bunch of school board members across the state because of the Hatch Act.
Sure.
Which I think is probably something that wasn't really thought all the way through with respect to that. So, yeah, I guess I was a little bit surprised, but I'm not terribly surprised that folks are like, yeah, maybe that's not a step we need to take.
All right, so with the idea that we're coming into the second half here, why don't you professor to us a little bit here and share just kind of what happens here as we start up the second half of the session. Obviously, the first part of this is that now the bills have switched houses, right? So walk us through the process.
Well, I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but I think probably less than a third of the bills are left. Maybe a fourth of the bills are left. So you've culled a lot of things out of the first half. Most important thing is if your bill passes one house, it's eligible in conference committee, and that's a critical thing for you and others who have legislation out there. And what that means for your viewers is if your bill doesn't get out of the second house, which is more likely than not, because the system is designed to stop stuff from happening rather than to make things happen, you'll still be alive in conference committee, which is really when us old folks go. That's when the session really starts. Is conference committee. Not entirely true, but it's largely true because that's when deals finally get cut.
Sure.
And bills get down to the wire. So the next couple of weeks, as you're listening to this, we're going to have committee hearings again like we did in the first half, as you know, and the bills that survived the first house, some will get hearings, some won't get hearings. There's fewer hearings, there's fewer hours devoted to looking into these bills, and people are trying to cut deals to get their bills heard, trying to cut deals on all types of things. And it'll be interesting. Of course, everything revolves around House Bill 1001, which is the state budget. It is the most critical thing. It's the only thing you really have to do. And in the end, it'll pass out of the Senate. It won't look exactly the way it did when it passed out of the House, and then it'll go to conference committee, and that's when the real work starts.
We don't often talk national politics, national policy on the podcast, mostly because we're pretty enveloped in what's happening at the state level, especially during session when we record. But there's like pretty significant impacts, I think, from national government now down to local and state governments. So, what are you seeing there as someone who pays attention to the full? And I should mention, if you don't remember, Kip's government affairs professional. He's a former city councillor, former state party chair. Has kind of been a part of all of it in all different kind of angles. So,
what are nice way of saying I'm old, right?
Yeah. Well, listen, we're on camera now. I don't think there's any
doubt, huh?
Yeah,
oh my gosh!
Last time around, it was just that sultry voice. So, what are you thinking? What are you kind of watching for as things unfold from a national level, and how that's going to trickle down into state politics and policy?
President Trump is only a month in. There's not being too political about it, but he's created a lot of chaos and uncertainty, and some of that is going to impact the states, specifically healthcare funding, cuts to Medicaid. In the state of Indiana, the budget bill, I think, the bill that came out of the Senate, I think, had a big cut to Medicaid, and we're going back on HIP 2.0, it looks like, cutting eligibility standards, forcing people onto the Obamacare plan. That's going to be an interesting thing, and what the federal Congress does and what Trump's executive orders mean for us in a whole variety of things. Federal grants that are going to be stopped, and they're going to be, we in Indianapolis particularly, part of our economy is built on federal grants because we have a very robust biotech sector here that a lot of money comes into them to help find drugs to save people's lives. And you cut any NIH funding, you cut science funding, you put those things on hold, you freeze them. Cancer research, all the kind of things that happen here in our city that are wonderful things for everybody and also good for our economy are on hold now, and that's going to affect our economy, and it could affect our tax receipts. It could affect a whole bunch of things that I don't think people in Washington, the Trump administration particularly, put a lot of thought into as to the big-time economic impact.
Well, and what's wild is this will air 2 weeks after we record it, so it's hard to even know. I mean, a lot can happen in the next 2 weeks even, as has been the case, every week. Yeah. There's some new movement out of the administration, the federal administration, that's kind of striking.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know whether there's a long-term impact upon what happened between Russia and Ukraine, but I think that's probably more long-term. But I'm very worried about it. I mean, we've basically had a complete reversal of the United States foreign policy for the last 50 years in the stroke of a couple of days here, where the president basically said, we're with Russia, not Ukraine.
Let's zoom back in. I think we had, the last time we talked, I'd asked you to kind of just reflect on your industry and how things had changed and what your kind of takeaways were in the time of your career in lobbying government affairs. It's been a year and a half. Has any of your thinking on all of this shifted in light of new national politics, new gubernatorial administration? Kind of where are you at these days? Are you hopeful and optimistic?
First thing I'll say is technology's changed things somewhat, right? I mean, fundamentally, it still comes down to building relationships, earning the trust of people, and making sure that there's an ability for people to talk to each other and give each other a little bit of faith and a little grace and a little trust to try to get stuff right. Use your word as your bond. That's the most important thing you have over there with legislators and with people like me who are coming to you with ideas trying to give our perspective from our client, but always coming from a place of truth. Because if you're not being truthful, you're ruining the only commodity you really have. I mean, most people, I think, look at us and say, well, you're just, dining and whining and dining these guys, and that's why they're for you. No, it's really because we build up trust. And you're not a professional politician in the way that they are in D.C. You have a day job. You don't have a staff to tell you all of the impacts of these bills like they do at the at the congressional level. And so you have to rely on us, and you get both sides most of the time from maybe me and somebody who's representing the other side. And so that hasn't changed. That still is a very important part of the process. It's still the way you learn, right? I mean, some of you do some of your research on your own, of course. You try to find as independent a thing as you can, but you rely on lobbyists to give you the straight scoop. And if they burn you one time, it's not too likely you're going to talk to them again, right? So that has not changed. Technology, though, has made it easier for me to pay attention. When the House and the Senate, interestingly enough, are both going at the same time, well, you had to pick and choose. You had either sit in the Senate side or sit in the House side, and you miss a lot of stuff. Now I have them both up on my screen, and I can sort of tune in and tune out as I hear things. And I sit at my desk more than I used to, rather than sitting in the hallway. So lobbyists starting to lose its root, which is in the lobby.
just out of curiosity, first, Earl, do you have a question?
Hey, Earl.
I guess not. I
thought he walked in.
I have another.
It's so dark in here. You can't see me.
Another question for you, and I'm interested in this. Have you started to deploy the use of AI to make your job easier yet?
Not really.
Yeah.
I know some lobbyists, and we've got a program that we can use that would help us synthesize bills and write responses and do all that stuff. But I haven't quite used it much yet.
Old school still. I like it about you.
I'm not afraid of it. I mean, I embrace it, but I just haven't had the occasion to have to do it. I mean, most of what I communicate is verbal.
Yeah.
So
spend a lot of time talking.
Yeah.
Kip, I guess I would ask you too. What's the thing you're hopeful for? We talk about the second half, right? Like when you think about, because we've had conversations, in terms of national politics, and it's easy to get down, right? And state government, while it is not as divisive, I will acknowledge it's not as divisive. I mean, we have the moments that they get pretty bad. What are you hopeful for coming into the second half as we kind of get towards getting back to work here?
Well, to that end, I think the fact that you guys are in the same room together so many hours of the day, human beings generally like to be nice to each other. It's the rare human that's like, I just want to fight with people all the time, right? And so it actually leads to more conducive behavior and people wanting to get along and wanting to try to help one another. And there's so that's the thing that I'm hopeful about. I mean, I think one of the things that makes me hopeful is those two bills kind of went by the wayside. I think people are actually listening, and that gives me some hope. I think that we're going to have some changes to property tax, which we'll kind of see. I'm hopeful that it's not going to be as drastic on municipal government as maybe we thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year. I come from, you and I are both served in the Indianapolis City Council. I have a deep passion for my city and seeing that it does well. I think, the road funding bill looks pretty good for Indianapolis finally. I mean, for most of my life, we've been getting gypped here, I think, because the rural communities got more than their share of the funds for our roads, and our roads are in terrible position. And it's not the fault of any of the three or four mayors we've had previously. It's really a problem because our funding is not kept up with the roads that we have and the amount of funds that we raise for the rest of the state. We've been a net donor county, as you know, for a long time. So
I want to talk about, one of the things you bring up, right, though, is there's still some hopefulness, right, because we haven't completely shut each other out.
Right.
And I think that's a really kind of great component of this, because we're able then to, on an issue like road funding, actually talk and try to find a solution that's advantageous for everyone at the table. And if we were like Congress and completely shutting each other out, we wouldn't be able to get to that place, I don't think. And I just want to acknowledge the entrance of Earl Harris Jr. As we wrap the episode up.
Perfect timing.
You're going to blend in the background, black on black.
What? I've been here the whole time. And if you make a teeth comment,
No. Well, Earl, how was the drive-in?
oh, the drive-in was great. I had to deal with some business stuff, and it took a little longer than I thought.
Business time. I understand.
So I'm sorry I missed the Kip Tew show.
He's a businessman.
He's a businessman.
Yeah, I have my moments, or at least I play one on TV.
There you go.
Well, Earl, we were just talking about how, there are still opportunities where both sides can find common ground and we can have real conversations and get stuff done. And while the divisions in Washington are front and center right now, there were some bad bills for sure this first half.
Big differences.
As we get into the second half, there's still room for optimism, right? As we work together.
Yeah.
And I think, Earl, correct me if I'm wrong. I hope I'm not saying something that's not right, but you did get your bill done to potentially have a sports district.
Yes. Yeah.
In
very excited about that.
In Northwest Indiana. So there's always hope that the Bears can become the East Chicago Bears.
Yes. And make sure you tell Representative Hatcher from Gary it's the East Chicago Bears.
Well, it is interesting. You think about the way this first half wrapped up as we come into the second half. Every time we looked up there, Earl or Mitch were passing a bill. Vanessa passed a bill this session.
Mm-hmm.
Pat Boy passed a bill this session. So our members are finding a way to work through it and get things done.
Mm-hmm.
So there are definitely some positives there.
Definitely. Well, and look, there are plenty of Republican bills that are positive as well. I think I'll just for my client, it was kind of an interesting bill, protection of genetic data. So folks that get on Ancestry.com or 23andMe, who probably some people in the audience who've done it, and your data in that thing, believe it or not, gets sold. But what the bill does is says your data, when it does get sold, has to be disassociated from you. So in Indianapolis, some of the big companies here use that data to help them with their science, to help them with new research on medical issues, right? And so it's very exciting that these companies have been able to get this much data, and it's very exciting that these companies get to use this data to make scientific medical breakthroughs, right? But the important thing too is that you get to protect your own stuff.
Sure.
And so this bill's out there, and it passed both the House and the Senate, and so they're going to come back. But it basically says you are in complete control of your genetic data. If you don't want them to sell it, if you don't want it to go to somebody else, you can tell them not to. And if they were to go out of business or they were to merge with somebody else, that data is yours, and you have the right to take it back and not let them share it or do anything with it. So, and it also puts protections on the back end. When they do sell the data, it has to be separated from you in a way that can never come back and identify you. So,
well, and that's, to the point, right? Vast majority of bills come out of the House. Not the vast majority of bills, but the vast majority of bills that do come out of the House are bipartisan bills.
Yeah.
Just a handful of
I was excited about one that passed today. It was authored by Representative Rowley, and I was able to join on as a co-author that has to do with helping out in terms of a fund for foster families. And my mother was a foster child. My mother served in this seat before I did. And so it's stuff like that I get excited about, because we've done a lot of work to help out with foster families, foster kids, foster parents that are raising. And so stuff like that floats through 100%, and it does good. There's no bad. That's one of those bills where you sometimes look at a bill and go, why would anyone vote no on it?
right.
Yeah.
It happens, but it's stuff like that I get excited about.
Before we run out of time, Earl, you have any questions for Kip? I kicked it over to you a couple times during the show already.
Yeah, I heard when I was coming in, I heard my name, and then I looked up and I saw a monitor
blank
with an empty chair there. So thank you for that, Mr. Co-host.
Listen, today
He
was
wonders
just-
why I try to get rid of him. Hey, Kip, what are you doing for every week?
You need a new job?
Any new job? So, hey, I actually, real quick, I know we're almost running out of time, and I apologize if you talked about this already. You actually came from a little bit of background. You were on the city council, right, in Indianapolis.
Right.
And then you were the former Democrat party chair, right?
Correct.
How does that help you? How do those experiences, how have those helped you with what you're doing now in the lobbying world?
Well, it hurts me some. So I'll start with that. I have, there's less trust of me with some Republican members because they think that I'm coming in with an agenda as a lobbyist. So it definitely can hurt in that respect. But on the Democratic side, I think, it helps. People are like, well, I've known him, and he's fought for the same things we fought for, so I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Now, you have to earn it, right? I mean, but I get the benefit of the doubt. And then some Republicans, respect what I've done, and they, at the end of the day, we're all kind of trying to do the same thing, make lives better for Hoosiers, and almost every Republican I've ever met, I may disagree with how they want to get there, but they think they're trying to make the world a little bit better place. And so there's a respect there, having been in the trenches with some of them and over the years, it ends up being pretty good, I think, at the end of the day, that my background, at least with them, has, some merit to it. And that's a good thing. The other thing, having been an elected official myself, it's much easier for me to empathize with where you guys are and all the pressures that you face, be it Republicans or Democrats in that respect, right? I mean, knowing what it's like to be an elected official and being able to impart that to y'all in a way that, because some lobbyists have no idea of all the pressures that you're under, of all the disparate stuff that comes to you. I have an appreciation for it because I sat in a seat where people were lobbying me, where I had to take into consideration what this constituent thinks versus that constituent, and it just gives me a better perspective of the job you guys have to do, the difficulties that you face with respect to that, and I think it makes me a better lobbyist for that purpose for sure.
You brought up something that I've wondered, because there's different lobbyists that we know. Like we had Allie Bartlett on, who's a Republican. We know who a lot of times what political party is, but the fact is it's still respect for what you do. You're working for your client, you're working for whatever. And we all know that, you serve as a Democrat, or you served as a Democrat in office. If you served as a Republican in office, it's still respect for what you've done. Even if it's the opposite party, I think for the most part, people respect it.
And most of my clients don't have issues that are partisan. So it's much easier to be able to have conversations about what's real and not get into the partisan fights. Luckily have stayed mostly out of those with the clients that I have, although I've had a couple. I did represent the Human Rights Campaign. And that was difficult getting very far, trying to protect trans kids.
So I don't know how much time we have because, I'm late.
A few minutes. Yeah.
Have you asked the question of what are you looking forward to in the second half?
He did. Well, he said, "What am I hopeful about?" Not what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah.
I guess the thing
could be a slightly different.
Could be a slightly.
I'm looking forward to being over.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's real. And here's the thing. I from the top of the show, I was honest with everyone that we're shooting twice today. That you're hearing from us as the start of the second half. But it's exhausting. I mean, this is a sprint and
in a marathon time.
And a sprint in a marathon time. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And coming into today, I mean, you're running in here out of steam too, because we've been at it now for this whole first half.
Well, you guys had 30 bills on third reading today that you had to understand and be able to take a vote on,
and I think
right?
yesterday was wilder. I mean, just the number of amendments and everything.
Yeah.
So, or yesterday, 2 weeks ago and yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean,
time
I think,
space continuum shift.
I think what people don't often realize is it's different for me. And we've talked about this on the show before. I go home every night to see my wife and kid, and I've got it pretty good in the grand scheme of things. But a lot of folks are doing all of this work, earnestly trying to make a difference, and also sacrificing time with their families and all that to do this. So yeah, you get to the point where you're just like, okay, can we be done? Especially on a Thursday afternoon, you're coming to shoot a podcast. You're like, oh my God, we had a really long week, girl. We had a really long week.
Yeah.
I feel a little bit lucky because I do like the intensity of it. I do like every day being really busy and going from one place to the next, but there's also a lot more stress in making sure you're not messing something up for your client. You didn't miss a hearing, you didn't miss a conversation. All that stress is there. But I also like the off season because that stress dissipates. At least that stress dissipates. So I like having a really intense time, and then I like having a time when it's not so intense. So for me, I am looking forward to the end of session, but I'll also miss session in that that adrenaline rush, the interesting things that happen every day in that state house that a lot of it doesn't get reported, but the human interaction that occurs is endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, it's good because then the next 8 months, Earl and I don't speak. We only do this.
Dude, I've seen you way too much.
You
got a cute kid, you got a great wife, but I'm done with you after that.
It's good to take a breather. This was Kip Tew. He is a government affairs professional, former city councilor here in the city of Indianapolis, former state party chair, all around friend and good guy, second-time guest on Sessions. And we're grateful you could come on and do this, and we'll be staying in touch the second half.
Thanks for having me on.